This is the Russian city of Kazan. Branded as the third capital of Russia, it has a population of 1.25 million people, which makes it the fifth largest city in Russia. That is slightly more than Nizhny Novgorod, 1.2 million people, but a good bit smaller than Yekaterinburg, with its 1.5 million. What makes Kazan a particularly interesting place for me is how it's one of those cities which demonstrates the multiculturalism that Russia has to offer and the complexity of managing the largest country in the world. Most people perceive Russia to be just for Russians, a homogenous society. In reality, Russia is one of the most culturally diverse countries in the world, as through its expansion it has incorporated many different cultures, religions, people and countries, otherwise known as Russian republics, of which there are now 22 within its domain, and Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan, is a perfect example of this. The population of the city is basically divided between two ethnic groups, 48.6% ethnic Russians and 47.6% ethnic Tatars. But including the whole urban agglomeration, which would include over 1.6 million people, the percentages is likely to skew in the favor of Tatars, making up more than 50%. This is somewhat surprising considering it is only 719 kilometers east of Moscow, a rather short distance by Russian standards. It is also considered to be one of the oldest cities in Russia, with an official founding date set around 1005, which would make Kazan 144 years older than Moscow, assuming that date is correct. So let's go to the beginning. Is the city really older than Moscow? Who are the Tatars? What role did the city play in the Russian Revolution, the Great Patriotic War, and what is it like today? Let's roll. The story of the region begins with the Bulgars, not to be confused with modern Bulgarians. They were Turkic semi-nomadic warrior-like tribes inhabiting the steppes of northern Black Sea region, all the way to the Caspian Sea and the northern Caucasus and the Volga regions. Some researchers say that their ethnic roots can be traced to Central Asia, and that during their westwards migration across the Eurasian steppe, the Bulgar tribes absorbed other ethnic groups and cultural influences, including Indo-European, Finno-Ugric and Hunnic tribes. In the 7th century, they moved into Middle Volga and Kama River regions. There, they created what is now called Volga Bulgaria, a multi-ethnic state with large numbers of Turkic Bulgars and a variety of Finnic and Ugric peoples and many East Slavs. Until around 1922, the religion of these people was largely based on paganism, but then the region converted to Islam with its first Muslim ruler. The adoption of Islam as a state religion also played an important political role from that moment on, as by becoming a part of the Muslim world, Volga Bulgaria established close economic and trade ties with other Eastern countries. Archaeological data indicate that after the adoption of Islam, the literacy level of the population increased, and the Volga Bulgars who converted to Islam are the ancestors of the modern Kazan Tatar people of today, and those Volga Bulgars who did not accept Islam are the ancestors of the modern Chuvash. With the exception of the Viking-like Rus in the west who constantly caused trouble and invaded, the Bulgars did pretty well for themselves, and their cities were relatively prosperous. To this day, the language of the Bulgars has not yet been deciphered, but the ruins of its alphabet have given much inspiration to modern Cyrillic. But big changes were in store for the region with the arrival of the first detachments of the Mongol armies, resulting in the Battle of the Samara Bend, which was the first battle between Volga Bulgaria and the Mongols. Amazingly, it is claimed to have been one of the first skirmishes the Mongols ever lost, taking place in the autumn of 1223. However, the Mongolian hordes just kept coming, and over the next 13 years they completely took over, and Volga Bulgaria became a vassal of the Golden Horde. With regards to the founding date of Kazan, I have to start talking about it here because it's not exactly clear when it happened. According to the official version, Kazan was founded in 1004 or 1005. This is supported by some archaeological finds dug up in the Kazan Kremlin dating back to the 1st century. There is however no evidence of buildings or structures dating that far back, and it is entirely possible no major settlement existed here until the 14th century, as that is the age of the oldest structures excavated in the region. And if that was the case, then the first settlements were likely created by the Bulgars, who were fleeing and being displaced by the Mongols, or by the Mongols themselves. Either way, Volga Bulgaria was eventually replaced by the Kazan Khanate, the rule of which started in 1438. The Khanate covered contemporary Tatarstan, Mariel, Chuvashia, Mordovia, and other parts, and its capital was the city of Kazan. And it was thanks to the Kazan Khanate that true and rapid development began, and what was likely a small village transformed into a city. The production of leather and pottery, weapons and armor established trade relations with Moscow, Crimea, Turkey, Persia and Turkmenistan. This was all facilitated thanks to the geographical location of Kazan on the Volga River and by being nestled between the crossroads of east and west. These, however, were not peaceful times, as indicated by the records of the Russo-Kazan Wars, a series of conflicts fought between the Khanate of Kazan and Muscovite Russia. Basically, the two states were constantly at war, and peace never lasted for long. Kazan was besieged no less than 10 times by Muscovite forces during the reign of the Khanate. One reason was that the Khanate was always going out of its way to get some Muscovite slaves and harassed its western neighbor, which didn't work out for them in the long run, as over the next century the power of the Mongol Khans slowly diminished and that of Moscow grew, and it peaked with Ivan the Terrible, who decided that it was time to kick out the Mongols. He marched onto Kazan with an army of over 150,000 men and besieged the city multiple times, employing battering rams, artillery and the most modern weapons available at the time. Kazan was captured after the third attempt, and Ivan absorbed the Kazan Khanate region into Muscovy in 1552. The taking of Kazan is also often lumped in together with the conquest of Astrakhan Khanate, which occurred in 1556. As Ivan acquired both of the territories and connected his capital to the Caspian Sea, his land was starting to look a little bit more like the Russian Empire we recognize today. In memory of the victory, Ivan ordered the construction of the Pokrovsky Cathedral, which was built in the Red Square in Moscow and is now known as the Cathedral of St. Basil, the Blessed, probably the most iconic structure in all of Russia. Ivan also requested the building of a Kremlin in Kazan in place of the old one which he destroyed. This Kremlin still stands today, a UNESCO World Heritage building, and is one of the most defining features of the city today. During the reign of Peter the Great at the beginning of the 18th century, the city became one of the most important industrial centers of the country. Peter was obsessed with the sea power as he wanted to turn Russia into a great seafaring nation. Kazan wasn't left out of his navy building equation, so in 1718 the Kazan Admiralty was founded, producing ships of various sizes. An interesting moment in Russia's history happened after Catherine II came to power, after replacing and dethroning Peter III, her husband and cousin, thereby ending the direct line of Peter the Great. Pukucho, a famous Cossack leader, didn't like that. This led to the Pukucho Rebellion, which was the largest popular uprising against central power in Russia before the Russian Revolution itself, affecting various social groups and made Catherine the Great seriously fear for her power. Pukucho assumed leadership of an alternative government in opposition to Catherine, promising a number of anti-imperial policies as well as to abolish serfdom. This struck a particular chord with the Tatars, who were considerably oppressed by the autocratic regime. As a result, in the summer of 1774, during the uprising, Kazan was captured by Pukucho rebels in a major battle which lasted some 4 days. Eventually, the rebels were overwhelmed by imperial reinforcements and pushed out of the city. This battle, however, has claimed a significant place in Tatar and Russian cultural history, as the first Tatar movie, Bulat Batyr, was devoted to Pukucho's rebellion in Tatarstan and the siege of Kazan. The Kazan Federal University is one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in Russia. Founded in 1804, it is known as the birthplace of organic chemistry, and it is also the birthplace of electron spin resonance. What either of those things are, I have no idea. Despite a number of major fires, the city grew and developed steadily throughout the 19th century and reached a population of 143,000 people in 1900. Before World War I, Russia possessed the third largest gold reserves in the world, bested only by the US and France. When the war broke out, the Tsar's supporters and the White forces moved nearly 500 tons of gold from St. Petersburg and Nizhny Novgorod and other cities which they felt were too close to the front line to Kazan. As a result, more than half of the gold reserves of the Russian Empire were concentrated there, and when the Russian Civil War initially broke out, Kazan was captured by the White Army forces. The Bolshevik Red Army laid siege to seize the treasure from the Tsar's troops. Whoever got the gold would have enough money to pay for arms and soldiers and would most likely win the revolution. In the summer of 1918, after a bitter fight with the White forces, Trotsky and the Bolsheviks took Kazan, But when the Red Army soldiers marched up the steps of the Kazan Bank, they found the vaults to be empty. The treasure was already on its way to Siberia, which was mostly under the control of the White Army and Admiral Kolchak. The gold, however, once arrived in Irkutsk was seized by the Czech-Slovak Legion, which used it as a bartering tool to be given a passage out of Russia and sold it back to the Bolsheviks. In the end though, it wasn't really the gold that let the Bolsheviks win the war, but it certainly helped supply its troops with the essentials. Intensive industrialization of Kazan began in the 1930s, but the population of the city exploded during the Great Patriotic War when factories and people were evacuated from Western Russia, east over the Volga and past the Ural Mountains. This was in order to protect the country's means of production from the Wehrmacht, who were quickly gaining ground in the country. Kazan became a massive center of wartime production. Its enterprises produced more than 600 types of weapons, ammunition and various equipment. During the war years, the city's aviation factories produced more than 10,000 strategic dive bombers, PE-2 and PE-8, which were considered the best examples of aircraft of this class. Over 11,000 U-2 bombers, which were irreplaceable when performing combat operations at low altitude and at night. And according to the experts, every sixth combat aircraft produced during the war years was made in Kazan. 45 hospitals operated in which tens of thousands of soldiers and commanders of the Red Army underwent treatment and rehabilitation, many of which were sent back to duty. And more than 4.6 thousand tank commanders were trained at the Kazan Infantry School. Overall, Kazan's contribution to the war effort was indispensable. Hitler never did take Moscow, as the great sacrifices and industriousness of the Russian people paid off, and it was thanks to the depth of the Russian land and cities like Kazan, Yekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, Samara and others that the tide of the war could be turned around. As is the story with all the cities mentioned above, to which means of production was relocated, they benefited greatly from the war, and this included Kazan. Its population doubled, and so did its industry, as it became one of the largest industrial and scientific centers in Russia. The population of the city exceeded 1 million in the early 1990s, and it didn't decline after the collapse of the USSR, which is typical of many Russian cities. In 1996, the Kul Sharif Mosque was rebuilt, which was destroyed during the seizure of the city by Ivan the Terrible. The height of each of the four main minarets reaches 58 meters. Overall, the city has been undergoing total renovation. The historical center, including the Kremlin, has been rebuilt, and a large number of the city's historical districts were completely demolished in the renovation. Kazan celebrated its 1000th year birthday in 2005. Annually, Kazan is visited by more than 2 million tourists, which makes it one of the most important tourist and cultural centers in Russia. And for good reason. On display is an amazing array of multiculturalism and a thick well of deep and fascinating history that this amazing city has to offer. This is a Golden Street Lights map of Kazan, which has been designed by me. Please consider purchasing it from geoperspective.org. This is the best way for you to support me. There, I also have a collection of maps which I am slowly building out, and will make me very happy if one of my maps could be hung in your home. And this is my Patreon map. Please consider placing yourself on this map and directly contribute to the creation of more content just like this. Now leave a comment, and guess where this footage was taken?